Donald Trump's transition team is compiling a list of current and former U.S. military officers for possible court-martials. Let's go. Steve Bannon says Mark Milley should be brought back to duty and court-martialed, and Trump is looking to investigate, as for these court-martials, what happened in Afghanistan. I completely agree. NBC News has the shocking report. All of the officers were involved in the chaotic U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, which independent reviews have blamed on both the Trump and Biden administrations. Really? Trump's fault. Let's go, baby. The Trump transition team is compiling a list of senior, current, and former U.S. military officers who were directly involved in the withdrawal from Afghanistan and exploring whether they could be court-martialed for their involvement, according to a U.S. official and a person familiar with the plan. I'm for it. Officials working on the transition team are considering creating a commission to investigate the 2021 withdrawal from Afghanistan, including gathering information about who was directly involved in the decision-making for the military, how it was carried out, and whether the military leaders could be eligible for charges as serious as treason, the two sources said. Holy crap. Now, look, my friends, I think when it comes to what we see Democrats do, I don't call it treason. I say it over and over again. I'm not here to be some partisan sycophant just screaming, ooh, Trump. My point is actually quite simple. Did they aid and abet an enemy in a time of war, which is the typical definition of treason by law? Now, as Andrew Wilson pointed out rather correctly yesterday on Timcast IRL, the colloquial definition of treason typically isn't about aiding and abetting an enemy in a time of or providing comfort to an enemy in a conflict or an adversary. They usually just mean you have betrayed your country in some way to destroy it. But that is sedition in the simplest terms. So colloquially, I get when people say treason, but let's speak clearly and with precise language. When we're talking about seditious conspiracy from, I don't know, judges, DOJ officials, etc., you criminally charge them. They go to prison. That's about it. Treason is more serious. To accuse someone of treason carries potentially the death penalty. I'm not a fan of going in this direction. I am not. First of all, I don't like the death penalty. I think the death penalty is morally reprehensible. I believe an institutionalized mechanism by which the state determines it could kill people is wrong because I don't trust the state to do it right. In warfare, there is a different question because it's not really the death penalty per se. But if someone is shooting at you in a war, yes, if you've captured someone who is a threat and a danger and they have secrets that will murder and kill lots of people and you're in war, I don't have good answers for you. Now, as they're looking at potential treason, the question with Afghanistan is actually something more serious. The Taliban got access to our weapons. China, Iran apparently got access to the weapons that were there. And if there's a question that someone involved in the military withdrawal was in communications with China about us leaving weapons and equipment there, I mean, we're talking about the potentiality that someone was aiding and abetting an enemy force, the Taliban. That's a terrifying prospect. I hope it doesn't come to that. I hope it's not true. But I do believe law must be followed and we must figure out what's going on. They're taking it very seriously. The person with knowledge of the plan said, the Trump transition team did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Matt Flynn, a former deputy assistant director of defense for counter-narcotics and global threats, is helping lead the effort, the sources said. It is now being framed as a review of how the U.S. first got into the war in Afghanistan and how it ultimately withdrew. Now, over at the Daily Mail, we have this story. Steve Bannon, last week, says that the Trump should rip apart the FBI and return Mark Milley to active duty so he can face a court-martial. No. Hold on there just a gosh darn minute, Mr. Bannon. Why should Milley face a court-martial? Donald Trump's former strategist, Steve Bannon, says former Joint Chief of Staff General Mark Milley should be returned to uniform on the first day of the new administration so he can be court-martialed. Bannon, who was recently released from federal prison, laid out his priorities for the next Trump White House and said he had been in close contact with his former boss, advising him on appointments. You'll love to see it. The populist provocateur spoke to former Trump press secretary Sean Spicer in an interview that will be released 6 p.m. on Friday. That's last week. In his recent stint in prison, has clearly done nothing to dim his revolutionary zeal. Number one thing is, I think Mark Milley has got to be recalled, the first action of President Trump. I think it is so important to reassert civilian control over the Pentagon, the uniformed services. I think Mark Milley has to be recalled to active duty on the afternoon of the 20th And I think a military tribunal, a court-martial, has to be impaneled. Mark Milley has to be brought up on charges and court-martialed. No, hold on there. All right, Steve, I hear you. I respect your passion and your zeal. The first thing Trump should do is investigate. So I think that is fair to say the Afghanistan withdrawal is clearly a failure of epic proportions. Let's talk about Afghanistan first. How did we leave and first abandon Bagram Air Force Base in the middle of the night? I'm no fan of us being involved in Afghanistan. It was a tremendous mistake, nation building. Ugh. You'd have to be there for like 5 generations to wipe out their culture and create a population that is self-sustaining. And that was the plan. That's insane. But we did it in South Korea. That was a long time ago in the 50s. That's following World War II with global superpowers, nuclear conflict, Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cold War was an active conflict between two superpowers that saw us involved in proxy kinetic conflict, like the Korean War. I'm no fan of any of it. And we occupied South Korea not because we're nation building, but because the spread of communism and the threat of global communist hegemonic power. And there's a lot of questions about what are the right moves, what were wrong. After this, in the fall of the Soviet Union, the idea that we would then invade Afghanistan and do the same thing, nonsense. Anyway, I digress. We abandoned Bagram Air Force Base, leave all of our material and weapons for random people, drop air support. The Afghan security forces are left with no communications, no idea what's going on. We force evacuations through the civilian airport where a bomb goes off. We lose our own men and women in uniform. Someone's got to be responsible for that. Because any sane, practical plan, I don't see how this was an accident. How do you accidentally abandon Bagram Air Force Base? You could have easily handled all evacuations through the Air Force Base. Trump's withdrawal plan should not have gone this way. Trump's withdrawal plan would have seen Afghanistan sustain itself imperfectly, but it would have. I believe so. What happens is, under Joe Biden's administration and Milley and whoever else, we get this abandoning of Afghanistan in such a ridiculous way that it allows the Taliban to walk right in, take multi-billion-dollar weapons caches, and now have access to these helicopters flying them around. That's insane. I wanted to see a withdrawal. But I'm not stupid. I'm not some bleeding heart lunatic who's like, just get them all out right now, no matter what. I'm like, timely withdrawal, which is what we've seen from Iraq. And we maintain consultants for as long as we need to. So the Afghan security forces are operating and keeping the Taliban out. You want to go? It's how we do it. What they did, I believe, was intentional. I've long said it seems that their idea was, let's burn this down to make them regret crossing us. The Americans need to stay involved in the Middle East. You see what happens in Afghanistan? Now, take a look at Israel, for instance. I actually tend to be slightly more pro-Israel as it pertains to a lot of these foreign interventions. And though I do think it's ridiculous that we're spending all this money on all these foreign conflicts, and in the long run, we should not be. But I'll put it this way. We talk about Ukraine, we talk about Israel, and there's this viral clip where it might have been Tulsi or someone was asked, should we be funding the war in Ukraine? Absolutely not. The money should not go there. What about Israel? Well, Israel's different. And the left came out screaming and laughing, saying, how is it any different? You have no answer. Well, I've got one for you. We're not allies with Ukraine. Our involvement with Ukraine is recent, and it's driving us towards direct confrontation with Russia. More money has been spent in Ukraine than we've spent in 70 years in Israel. So Ukraine is a unique and exorbitant and ridiculous problem for us. And I don't see why we should be involved in this conflict that could lead to nuclear war, which is now basically on the verge of happening, which I'll say for the next segment. What I see is Israel is a long-standing ally. For better or for worse, we've been involved with Israel going back some 70 years. We have aligned with them. We have provided them with military aid. And this has led to increasing conflicts and a crisis that, heavens, may be like the most complicated problem we've seen on this planet. It's a religious conflict. It's a territorial conflict, a territorial dispute, resource conflict. It's nuts. I think in the long run, the U.S. should be divested from support of Israel militaristically. But you don't do it overnight. And it might take a long time. I'm a realist, not an idealist. OK, ideally, we do get out, but you can't do it overnight, which means Israel needs to become self-sufficient in some capacity. They need to stop. I have no problem with us selling, or buying things from them. If they need money, then they can build things we need and we can buy it off them. We do buy a lot of weapons tech and security tech from Israel. My point is, in the long run, we should be out of Israel, but it is different from Ukraine. We are entrenched there. A rapid withdrawal from Israel would be worse than Afghanistan. We don't want any of that. This system and machine of the military-industrial complex, which I despise, has been built over a millennia. Okay, technically, being very hyperbolic. It's been built over the past century, all right? Not to exaggerate. And Rome was not built in a day. It is not to be dismantled in a day. Now, you can talk about the sacking of Rome. We don't like that. Like everything's burned down. No. We want an orderly removal because we don't want Israel to be anything like Afghanistan. It would be substantially worse. Plus, as much as I actually hate to admit it, as I am a fan of Ben Shapiro in most of what he says, I agree with him on so much. I hate to admit that there is a real problem that Israel could nuke one of its enemies if it faces an existential threat. Ben Shapiro points out, and he is correct. If we divest completely and Israel is wiped out or faces a threat, they could launch a nuke and then World War III. I know it sucks. And everyone says it's a terrible excuse for involvement. Yeah, but it's not wrong. Like, I say this, the plan needs to be crafted today for how we stop spending all of our money on Israel and getting entrenched in these Middle Eastern conflicts. But Israel is a 70-year entrenchment, which cannot be undone overnight. So I'm more pro-Israel than that, but I equate this only to Afghanistan to point out there are differences. And I use Afghanistan as an example of how we have to deal with this in an orderly fashion. But I digress. Those that were involved in Afghanistan, I do believe have criminal culpability. So, my friends, to those in the Trump administration, heavens help me, please. Kash Patel, FBI director, come on. Matt Gaetz AG, I'm already happy about. I say bring on the court marshals. Bring it on. It's possible, okay? Which means we investigate. And if there's no wrongdoing, it's incompetence, you're fired. Thank you and have a nice day. And if there's criminal culpability, that's it. We'll see, my friends. But war is coming, and I'm deeply terrified. Stay tuned. The next segment is coming up in about an hour. You don't want to miss it. Smash the like button, share the show with everyone you know, and we will see you all over we'll see you here. But follow me on X and Instagram at Timcast. Like I said, timcast.com, be a member. Next segment's coming up soon.